Thank you. That was a great introduction. It was wonderful to reconnect with Doug again after so many years and kind of starting out together in this business or field, I guess we call it. We don't call it a business. I think I want to just get started with the slides. Doug suggested when we were talking about my talk that it might be good to start with some very old work to frame what I'm doing now. To frame what I'm doing now. Is that better? Okay. So this is kind of where I got started working with photography, and in some ways, photography and text. This is an ad that I photographed for Women's Press, which was one of many feminist newspapers that were produced across this country in the 1970s. Each major town that had a large women's community, we all seemed to have newspaper collectives. And so I started out making photographs as illustrations for one of these newspapers, and was experimenting with photojournalism, photographing marches, without any education. So from there, I moved on to various other things and working with an early series of photographs, which was untitled, in which I photographed women in some kind of a hyper drama kind of relationship with each other. And this is early work. This is from 1984. And then when I installed it, I put the photographs really close together so that there was a kind of choreography of movement from image to image. And these were the sort of beginnings of movements towards a kind of more pronounced narrative approach in photography. And this is a piece called Money is Time from 1986. And I was doing these large photonovella wall installations. This is a detail from Money is Time with they would be about 30 feet in length and stacked narratives. And I was also working with these hand-drawn dialogue balloons that I would draw and then rephotograph and print photographically and montage directly on top of the photograph. And from there, I moved on to working on more linear narratives. These narratives, these early narratives, were not only cut and paste in terms of the strategy of montage, but also interrupted narratives and nonlinear narratives. But I also became very interested in linear narratives and ways that you could create a subtext within those. And the first of these was Unknown Deviancies, What a Dish. This is from 1989. And let's see. Oh, there, it's in focus. And Unknown Deviancies, What a Dish is based on looking at women's superhero comics from the middle 1970s and reading as many of them that I could get my hands on and kind of trying to decode the narrative structures and how identification worked within the narratives. And at the same time, I was reading a lot of feminist theory about film narrative and identification. And so I kind of combined all these ideas together in a 9-panel narrative. So these, and the way they occupied space on the wall was a series of frames. And one thing, so it was a more of a contained kind of use of the wall rather than using the whole wall as the frame for the work that would sort of explode out. Each panel was almost like a page of a comic. And I was thinking a lot about this strategy to bring reading into the gallery. And at the time, there were a lot of people working that way. This was 1992, 93. There's always a kind of discussion about whether that's an appropriate place for reading to happen, or if a more primary kind of visual process should be the only thing that would happen in the gallery. But I was quite interested in this kind of conflict between the text, which occupied a visual space, and also the photographs, which you could also read as a kind of text, because there's always this competition when you're looking at cartoons about whether you read the narrative through looking at the images and the way they're sequenced, or whether you're reading the text for the information about the images. So I was often working with the text in a way that would be either contradictory or be a method for putting another text, another narrative into the mix. This is Making the Most of Your Backyard, the story behind An Ideal Beauty, and this was from 1991. And this one is based on Renaissance poem by a French writer whose name was Guillaume de Lory, and this poem was a big hit in the late medieval period, early Renaissance. It was called The Romance of the Rose, and it was translated into Middle German and it was written in Middle French. It was translated into Middle Italian. Actually, Chaucer translated it into Middle English, sorry. So The Romance of the Rose is a allegorical poem about a dreamer who falls asleep and awakens in the garden, and he wakes up and he looks into Narcissus's pool and falls in love with a rose. And the whole poem is about how to approach the rose. And in some ways you could say that it's an early treatment of the distance between the lover and the loved object. And at the time, of course, it was a kind of template for how to approach courtly love. And the way I'm working with the montage is someplace at this point in between the sort of cartoon comic book approach I was making before and something that might be more related to garden designs. And the garden becomes metaphor for nature and love, and a lot of the kind of play historically between this language. And also the process of montage and the cut up is always externalized into the tools that I'm using to talk about these issues in the narrative, so that the clippers are also the cutters. At the same time, I was working with montage in a way that was maybe more related to issues from Russian constructivism or Berlin Dada. And at these points, I moved the text below the images and worked with a more filmic idea in my mind, in any case, about moving from image to image in the montage. And these were projects that I was making about consensus decision-making, collective living. This is a piece from 1990, which is called Are You Politically Correct? And it's from a series called 13 Questions. And in this one, the central motif is this landscape of the Unisphere, but in fact, this was the Unisphere that was at the entrance to Leisure World in Laguna Hills, California. So there's a kind of reference to the 1964-65 World's Fair globe in Queens, and then a remove from that to the Southern California landscape of retirement villages and planned communities. And then in this case, I was pretending to interview my characters and ask them if they're politically correct. And each one had a different response that had to do with some kind of aspect of the political discussion on the left, either historically or at the time. But I also worked with this in a publication, and that gave me the opportunity to kind of bring it back to this photonovella or kind of cartoon roman format again back onto the page. And this is from an exhibition that Sunil Gupta organized, and this is from the publication that was a part of that. Around that time, I'd been working very intensely on photo and text narrative, and this is a very layered, long process, and I began to want to strip things away back into their component parts, in a sense. And I made a series called Not Through Any Sort of Vanity, and which I was kind of trying to think about these portrait heads somehow separated from a background, and a series of single photographs in which I would somehow talk. This is actually Alan D'Souza who's speaking later in your New Voices series. And I was thinking about identity and how identity would be represented in a painting from, say, the Renaissance or the 17th or the 18th century, and how the hat and the sort of function of the sitter and the pose functioned into this construction of identity. So I wanted to kind of take these issues out of the narrative and put them into a single image. And it was also extending some of the play that I was doing with costume in some of the photonovellas. This is a detail from Making the Most of Your Backyard. In 1993, I started the third in the series of these linear narratives that are based on pre-existing narratives with Tit for Twat. And Tit for Twat is ongoing. So at this point, I sort of focused all my attention into working out this story of Genesis. So Tit for Twat is the story of Madam and Eve. And Tit for Twat investigates narratives of origin and looks at how meaning is constructed from this notion of an originary point, whether that be creationism or Darwinian theory or museology or notions of original objects in the Natural History Museum, and how human nature is sort of constructed and represented out of this idea of this first moment where the first couple got together in Eden. And on the right in this panel is Madam, and on the left is Eve, and in the center is the tree. But because I'm the artist and I live in Southern California, the tree is the orange tree. And the pantheon of sort of angelic characters who are mediating this narrative are the talk show hosts around the top of the tree. And Madam and Eve are scientifically oriented. They're both really desirous of knowledge. So I sort of turned this kind of curiosity idea about Eve into a kind of desire to know and to learn about the natural world. And they're both sort of independently in their own parts of the garden, examining, categorizing, trying to figure out what the difference between one thing and another is. Madam is especially interested in the whole picture, the panorama, and a kind of simultaneous knowledge of everything around her. This is an installation at Ars Electronica in 2000. And the thing that was interesting for me about showing in this context is that Ars Electronica is an annual festival exhibition which is about digital art primarily. And there's a lot of discussions in these situations about interactivity. Most of the works are in small, darkened gallery spaces. And the audience is going into these spaces and waiting to get their hands on a mouse and standing in line so that they could have this kind of interactive experience. And the curious thing about showing this very non-computer generated work in this context was that the audience was already thinking about interactivity and how they could move in and out at any point. So they took this very old form, which is reading a text and a picture narrative on the wall as you move along the wall, and realized that they could move back and forth across the gallery. They could move forward in the narrative, move back at any point, move forward to something they were curious about seeing, and then pick the narrative up at any point. And a lot of people were talking to me about how this functioned as an interactive kind of presentation. And here I'm coming back into some earlier ways I was presenting work in which the work is popping out from the wall again, and it's not just a framed work anymore, but now these poodle trees, which are kind of also constructing a kind of landscape space around the garden, pop out and become their own spaces. And they also frame the framed works. This is the second section of Tit for Twat. It's a three-part narrative. The first part is called Madame and Eve in the Garden, and the second is Can We Talk? And Can We Talk is the most expansive, expandable part of the narrative, and it's really about mediation between subjectivity and history and the media, and the sort of over-narration that the media makes into our lives, or in this case, into Madame and Eve's experience. So here are all the talk show hosts discussing the narrative of Can We Talk that's about ready to come up in the next section of the exhibition. And here, Madame and Eve are on the talk show for the first time. So this is really the first point where they have a voice, where they can speak and say what they really think about what went on in Eden. Because I don't know if you've been reading Genesis lately, but Adam and Eve don't talk much in that narrative. It's all these other voices that are sort of describing their experience there. Do you want some text?
What's the form of the speech?
Well, in this particular panel, you can see three. Let's see if I can get a little better focus. Are you focusing?
I can have it.
Okay. Good, that's it. There's three different kinds of dialogue balloons that have to do with the three different kinds of texts that are in this. That Madame and Eve speak in these scroll shapes, because they're early characters and early sequential narratives, visual sequential narratives. The characters always kind of speak in these scrolls, or they'll kind of hold a scroll that has the text in which they speak. The talk show hosts have these very regularized kind of calligraphy type handwriting, because it's a very formalized kind of coded speech. And these are the audience members who are kind of coming down in this kind of river, kind of through the middle of the grid of the talk show. And theirs are kind of like either televisions or placards, and they say these things like, you can't be the original couple, you are dykes. We want creation to be taught as science in school. We won't support your sin as science. You are fiction, not history. So their speech is always very cut up the way it is in a talk show. It sort of comes out as a statement and then gets cut up immediately, and doesn't sort of become its own continuous thing. And they're saying things like, focus again. Here. Up here at the top, she says, no one ever listens to us, do they, Eve? All these crazy rumors. Can you believe it? People here actually think that Adam lives with us. And below she says, have you heard the one about my boyfriend? I don't know anyone named Adam. And then here she says, well, never mind about Adam. the whole thing, and then it kind of comes together the same way a talk show does not, in a sense.
Thanks, that's helpful.
But in each one of these narratives I'm showing you, there's a different voice that's adopted, and there's a different sort of calligraphy and a different way that the text is meant to function. So I'm not, each time, even though there's image and text and some kind of design with the photographs, I'm not always, it's again to establish a new approach or to work on a different aspect of this method of making a layered narrative. So tit for twat, here's a enlargement. This is the last panel of the talk show, and at this point the scrolls have just gone wild, and they're weaving in and out of Madame and Eve on this talk show, and they're sort of going on to this whole thing about the original moment and the original impulse, and they're saying we're the breakthrough, the first ones to do it. I did it first, me first, me first. The beginning and the end, the origin of, the origin of. And by this point, the televisions have been sort of moved off into the corners of the composition. And you can see here's an installation photograph. The televisions are in the corner, and in the hand, in the center of this composition, are the sort of worried, concerned hands of the subjects of the talk show. A lot of these panels are based on early strip narratives, medieval and Renaissance strip narratives from research that I've done. So they frequently have these very symmetrical compositions because I found that in a lot of the research I was doing. So there's sort of several levels of research going on at the same time. So here's one that I want to sort of unpack for you. Kind of, this is a sketch for a panel that I will make, which is about Madame and Eve going to hell. And the reason why they go to hell is because audience members tell them that if they continue to claim to be the first couple, that they'll go to hell. So they go, okay. So they go to hell, and they sort of end up on the stage at the Garnier Opera House, having a very melodramatic, sort of operatic, narrative. And this is from the architecture in this opera house. And this is the television talk show audience here. And this material in the background is taken from a fire that happened in Griffith Park in Los Angeles. And I began photographing in Griffith Park because I wanted to use it as a background for this project and specifically. Excuse me. And these are some of the photographs that I was taking of these burned hillsides and spaces. And you can see then that it sort of ends up, this twig that's been burned ends up as a stage prop. And the background of the burned area with the cloudy sky ends up as the scene painting behind. So what has ended up happening actually is that Tit for Twat then has become, it continues to be a project that I'm working on. In fact, I'll be exhibiting 2 new sections of it this next September in Copenhagen and also in Vienna. So I continue to bring it forward into the places where Madame and Eve will travel to sort of have this discussion about origin. But it also becomes a sort of jumping off point for other narratives, or other projects. This is a project that's called Burned, and I photographed this burned area in Griffith Park for over a year, and during that time, El Nino was also happening, and so there was this tremendous regrowth and regeneration in the landscape. And I also did this as a kind of process to sort of try and figure out what I was looking at in Southern California. So I'll show you some of the images from this series. There's about 45 images in the series, and they're, in some cases, they show a kind of transformation in an area. So, for example, this space was sometime after the burn happened, and then several months later, a lot of the vegetation had started to come back, and I thought this might be a way for me to begin to understand what this landscape looked like as it restructured itself sort of from the ground up. And you don't often get that opportunity with a space to kind of understand what's underneath it before the surface begins to become built up. And in particular, I was interested in working on something that had to do with the sort of removal of detail, since in so much of my work I'm always loading up the detail. Then it was interesting almost to scrape it back in a certain way and see what the foundation was that was being built up. And these are just some other images from the series. When I show the photographs, they're quite large, and I show some of them framed and some of them unframed, so that this idea of framing is always externalized in the work rather than a default position, so that there's the possibility of approaching it either as it is just with the paper on the wall or as it looks in this formal kind of presentation. And in this exhibition, I also showed another series of work, which is 328 Museum Drive, in which I photographed the walls in a house I lived in after a domestic relationship broke up. And then I photographed the places on the walls where the photographs had been. And again, in 328 Museum Drive, it was the same impulse to sort of get back to the surface and to see what's left once all of those images from the montage are removed, and what's the trace that's left there. So there's a sort of shift in the direction of the work, and more awareness of loss actually really begins to enter the work at this point. And this is from an installation, from an exhibition at the Schindler House in Los Angeles, which turned out to be a really amazing place to show these photographs, because the way Schindler designed his houses was very much about trying to bring the materials from outside into the inside of the Southern California landscape, and that ended up being quite a great juxtaposition with these images from the outside. And in other cases, I have also shown this work with tit for twat, partly because for me, aesthetically, and you can see that here, this is from an exhibition at Art Resources Transfer in New York, which is, in this case, on this opposite wall here, here's this photograph from the Burn series that I just showed you. And in tit for twat, there's this kind of Gothic aesthetic with these Old English letters and all of this black that, this kind of cartoon black that goes around all of the cutouts. And I think that there's a similar aesthetic that I'm working out through the Burned series as well. Here's another preliminary sketch for a panel in tit for twat. This is also from Can We Talk, from the second part of the narrative. And in this, Madame and Eve are going in and out of museums and looking for original objects and looking for this original story. And this one's at the Louvre. And they also go to natural history museums because, of course, this is another place to find the story of man and to find out about where we all come from. And in this case, you can see in the bottom right corner, they end up on on display in one of the vitrines. So part of my research for this is going in and out of museums as I travel and gathering photographs to use in these montages as I'm building them up. And for that reason, I went to the Natural History Museum in Vienna, and I went there primarily because the Venus of Willendorf is housed there, and the Venus of Willendorf is an important original object that has all kinds of associations, sort of specious associations with it. It's often called an original fertility object, although the curious thing about that is that the time that she comes from was actually a time period when most of the tribes were nomadic, and apparently fertility objects are really uncommon to nomadic tribes. But it was in talking to scientists about the Venus of Willendorf, which is also a 19th century appellation. Of course, it's pretty hard to figure out what something was used for if it's 20,000 years old. And carbon dating and all these things doesn't really tell you that much about the culture that existed at the time. So in any case, I'm at this museum because of the Venus of Willendorf and because of Tit for Twat. And I became really fascinated with this museum because it was built in the 1890s, and it was built to house the Habsburg collection. And the Habsburg collection has a very interesting history starting with cabinets of wonder and cabinets of nature and natural wonder, and sort of then bifurcating into the different categories of art history and natural history. And in these images, what you can see here is a view of one of the collecting ships, a miniature collecting ship, Austrian collecting ship. And beyond that, the rotunda of the museum, kind of the European context. And looking in the opposite direction, and our focus is, that's went back in, good. In the opposite collection, you can see perhaps some of the ostriches, sort of things that might have been collected by this ship, things brought from the New World, the so-called New World, that they were going out and bringing examples of the collectible world back with them. And what's really amazing about this institution is that many of the exhibits are still formed in the ways that they had been thought of in their original categories. And these fantastic snake installations are really a marvel to see because they're all arranged in these ideas that have to do with nature and decoration that you would have seen in former times, not the way you would see snakes now. And you see the map on the top. Always there's this sort of relationship to mapping the world with the collection and comparing all the different parts in the collection. And this is a really remarkable room of the mineral collection, and they still have all the typed labels next to the mineral collection, and it's definitely not the minimal collection. That was a funny slip. But and they're arranged in strange, idiosyncratic ways that have to do with geography. And it's fascinating to look at this template or mapping of the world. But the reason why I started photographing in this museum was they're changing the installation because the modern audiences can't handle looking at this many details, or so they've decided. So now they're changing them into computers and touch screens and videos and things that they think will increase the number of people that come into the museum. And partly because privatization is finally hitting Austria as well. So they need to have the certain numbers coming in through their door. This says Echte Krokodila, which means real crocodile. So there's some wonderful things in these. And you can see kind of the way the old glass is really makes these great kind of wiggly reflections also. So here you can see the difference between the old kind of display on the right, which would just be the antelope there on a wooden platform with a little label. Nothing else about it, nothing to naturalize it or turn it into a sort of fake real space. And on the left, something that I think that we're much more used to, these kind of diorama situations where the antelope are put into kind of fake mountainous situations with a painted backdrop. And what I began to find is these rooms that had been partially emptied out or censored for some reason. Something had changed in them, and you could kind of see these layers of different time periods of display. So here's this kind of 1980s track lighting over the sort of frieze around the top. This was the room of the races, so you have like paintings of Hawaiian Islanders and Fiji Islanders all around the top of the room. And in the cases, there was something in the cases that from one day to the next, they just covered up and censored. And these had been this really kind of scary exhibit of skulls in which skulls of different races were being compared racistly. And there was a big discussion in the Congress, apparently, about how they couldn't have this display, and how embarrassing it was for Austria. But of course, it was also very fascinating to see this. It could have been kept with some kind of explanation about what this means and why natural history was organized in this way. But for some reason, they still have this Neanderthal family stuck back on the edge in the edge of this room having dinner. And I think it's really a sort of strange idea about the family that you see kind of traced through this museum, that there's always a kind of notion that, of course, the Neanderthals sat down to dinner and had a conversation as well, just like any good Viennese. This is the room of the sharks, and this is the kind of state that I would find some of the rooms in. It's kind of different than you would find in an American museum, because usually you can't go into a room when an installation is in progress. So I was quite excited to see the traces on the floor of where the large vitrines had been, and this is sort of one of my interests in continuing to photograph this museum. Or in this case, I was photographing this empty case with the reflection of the display that's in the rest of the room that was kind of projected by the light into the case. And during my exposure, one of the cleaning women stuck her bucket down into the middle of the exposure, and it ended up with this kind of ghost image. Most of my exposures are anywhere from 4 to 6 minutes long, because there's not still a lot of light in this museum. And the light in the museum actually is something that they didn't have light in this museum until the middle 1990s. So in the winter months, they would just close the museum at 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon. And in some cases, you can see, in this empty case, you can see the Vienna and the sort of reflection of Vienna in it. So this is an interesting thing to me, to sort of bring the city itself, which is a kind of museum of older architectural styles that have been reconstructed and recreated after World War II and after the bombing in World War II, to sort of maintain this history. This is the title of the piece of the series, Vitrinen in Arbeit, which means vitrines in work or under work. So this is about the scale of the works when I exhibit them. And then you can see on the left also an artist book that I produced in which I've sequenced all of the images. And there's about 137 images in the book, and the book is about 152 pages. And it's an edition of 25. So I like to show the book with the prints, so you can sort of see that it comes from a larger project. And also, another piece which sort of is simultaneous. Are you focusing this one, or should I? You try. Good, that's it. Thank you. This is a project that I began in 1999, which is called Kathy Acker's Clothes. And Kathy Acker was a writer sort of associated with the punk scene. And she died in 1998 of breast cancer. She was quite young. She was 52. And the executor of her estate is someone who was familiar with my work and the way I'd worked with costume in a lot of my works. And he invited me to work with her clothes and asked me if I didn't want to do something with the archive of her clothes. And she had fantastic collection of clothes, primarily from the 1980s, and there were certain designers that she was very interested in who I think were also associated with the punk scene, such as Vivienne Westwood and Jean-Paul Gaultier and others. And also there's other aspects to this series, and it's another large archive, and I guess you could relate it also to this idea of something that's lost and archiving it in a way. And I was very interested in her work because she plays with persona and sexual persona and gender so much in her work, and it's something that I've been very interested in my own projects. And so I made this series of photographs, and as Doug mentioned, I showed them in the Berlin Biennial in 2004, and I just came back from an exhibition in Aachen at the Neuer Aachener Kunstverein, where I have shown another set of these. And this is a very large body of work with 152 images, and moving across the images, you get this sense, I think, of a very complex personality. But this is not a biography of Kathy Acker because although I met her and I'm somewhat familiar with her work, I don't have this kind of intimate knowledge of her in these clothes, and I'm not trying to recreate something about her as much as my impression of her as someone who is very alive, certainly through, and who is very alive through her writing. So for me, these became as much about organizing these objects for the camera as something that was worn by someone, although that resonance, of course, is inescapable in the project. Took me a couple months to make these photographs, and I worked in the studio every day and with an assistant, and what we did was they're all hanging from monofilament on the hanger, and then the monofilament is lifting things up and lifting them out so that I can get the kind of photograph that I want. And in some cases, they're stuffed with cotton batting or bubble wrap or something to sort of give them some volume on the hanger and some movement also.
So the warping is by tucking or the angle that you...
The warping,
So like someone's arms is like too big or too thin, like that one.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's got a piece of monofilament on the end that's pulling it up, or in something like this one. To get that kind of kick a little bit on the left, it's folded over a piece of monofilament, so it's hanging like that. But it disappears because the monofilament disappears because it's on this white background. The background never totally gets white, partly because of the way the film works with the background. But I wanted to have a very kind of floating, light, open kind of feeling rather than to make it something that was really about death and mourning, but so that it would be more about appreciating this kind of pleasure and the pleasure in the clothes. But you can see that the breasts are kind of filled out in this one so that it makes the clothes look a certain way. But I didn't do things like get rid of stains or repair tears or anything like that. And then there's not so much to show you in installation, except I wanted to show you that it's a very simple strategy for installation. That they're just, the photographs are not that big. They're about 15 inches square, and they have a mat around them and a kind of washed white frame so that it extends this space around them and makes them float. And there's something that can happen with them if they get too close together. They start looking like a closet, which is not what I intended. I really want them to sort of have plenty of space around them when I exhibit them. So can I have the next tray? The last project that I want to talk about today is a project called The Boy Mechanic. And this is a project that I started in 1996, and it's another one of my ongoing projects. And it's about the history of lesbian bars. And I was commissioned to make a project in 1996 for the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego, for an exhibition that was called Republic. And it was an exhibition that they organized in contrast to the Republican National Convention that was happening at the time. And they wanted to invite artists who were doing something that would be outside of what the Republican agenda was being described as at the time. I don't know if you remember this idea of the Republican agenda that was part of their campaign in '96. And I had wanted to make an archive of lesbian bars across the U.S. And because there's such fugitive spaces, the 7-day-a-week bars usually don't stay open that long. And then, of course, because they're bars, and people kind of forget about what bars they used to go to, maybe because they're drinking or maybe because bars don't seem so important. It's not the kind of thing that many histories have been written about. Although now that there's, I think in the last 10 years or so, people have become really interested in gender and space and architecture in this way, and how different spaces can hold a certain kind of public and social history. So I worked on a videotape for that exhibition, and I had a chance to re-edit the videotape into a video installation in 2000 for this exhibition, Hers, Female as Video Terrain, which was in Graz. And in this case, I had an installation in the center, which was a bar and bar stools and bar tables, which gave the viewers a place to sit during the time of the video installation. And on the left was a 10-minute video of the exteriors of these bars. And on the right was a 10-minute video at the same time, which was interviews with people who had gone to the bars or had been bar owners, talking about the structure of the bars on the inside, how they were organized, how the tables were, how the bathrooms were, what kind of a social space had to be constructed to function well as a lesbian bar, what didn't function well. And these two, you would only hear the audio from one channel or the other during the 10 minutes, and then there was a third moving video that would sort of start, which was a 1-minute monologue, and then the videos would start again, and they would both be going, but you would only hear the audio channel from one of them, either the interior or the exterior. But you have this awareness of the relationship of the interior to the exterior. And then at the same time, I started making a photographic archive of the facades of these bars, and this is Club Bombay, and this is from '96. And then Club Bombay, I went back in 2003, I think, or 2002, and photographed Club Bombay again, and it was still a lesbian bar, but it had become 6 degrees. And this is the Flame. At the time when I photographed it, this was '96, and the Flame actually was a lesbian bar that lasted a long time, but it's now closed. And this is X, which was formerly a bar called Lily's. So the titles indicate whether they are currently a lesbian bar when I photographed them, or if it was something that had changed. So this is a installation picture from an exhibition called Hausordnungen, which means house rules. It was an exhibition in Ulm in Germany, and it was in this Richard Meyer designed museum. And because of Richard Meyer and his kind of idea about how artists should show art, it was impossible to show a video installation there because they weren't allowed to shut the windows because his architecture was all about showing the light in the space, and also they can't put holes on the wall. They have to hang everything from a hanging rail elsewhere in the exhibition. So it's a little annoying that these architects they commission these architects to do art spaces in a way, because it's like you can never get away from the design of the architect. But it gave me the chance to kind of think about this exhibition in a different way, and so I had been working on this archive of these photographs, and I took the videotape and I made a single screen version of it with a split screen, so you could still get the correspondence of the two sides. And this is another look at the sort of scale of these images and how they worked in the space. And at the same time, I started producing postcards and having the postcards always for sale in the bookshop, kind of a Wish You Were Here, or George Washington lived here, or this was a lesbian bar that I didn't visit, but I wanted to send a postcard of it to you to sort of let the sort of published postcard work as a kind of, even through the miniaturization of it, let it be a kind of memorialization of it. And I wanted to show you some of the video, but I think I've been going for over an hour now. Shall I go on with the video? Shall I take a vote? Pardon me? The short one, was that this one that you wanted to show? Well, that's a little bit longer. The shorter one is from the recent. Maybe that's what I'll do. Let's show a clip of the first one, just a short amount rather than the whole thing. And I need to do this, right?
Where the post office is now, where that hotel is. Downtown, or no, right here on Bird Road. Oh, yeah. Let's go there. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That close too.
I'm pretty sure that was the apartment. Although it wasn't open like that. It just had that center door. And it was never this crowded. can't remember it being this crowded. I remember coming down here on Sunday afternoons and just sort of hanging out at the bar.
And I just happened to be sitting out front that day, yeah. It must have just opened, you know, it was early afternoon. I was reading one of the flicks, yeah, one of the papers.
There you were.
Yeah, isn't that funny? I says, God, yeah, that is very special. I've had it for quite a few years, many years for that matter.
Right up the street, this is in Pacific Beach, Mission Beach, there was a women's bar called the Matador, and for years it was a women's bar. Today it belongs to men, basically frequent it. But the woman that owned that bar's name was Chicky, and she was married to another woman, and they had a son, and it was very Midwesternish.
Well, the few bars that I went to Menopause Meadows, do you remember that? The Matador. The Matador in Pacific Beach. I don't know if that's still there or not.
What used to be the Griffin, it's now it was the Shadows for a while, and now it's the North Park Country Club. But it was the Griffin. It was a beer bar, and rough.
And there was a bar right down the street called Sereno's that opened up after Diablo's closed down. And of course, that was the next new bar in town. And for the next year, it was filled and packed almost every night of the week because it was an old ballroom dancing floor bar. It wasn't like a bar. It was beautiful and classy and elegant.
There were all these funny stories about it, that it was like owned by the mafia, and they didn't mind making money on gay people, and that we'd be welcome there.
It's a beer wine bar up here on Corner Park and Adams. That just used to be a softball place, a Sunday night thing.
A different building, but this is where Diablo's was.
Diablo's, Wild Turkey, and Donna Summer. Disco.
It wasn't so much dangerous and rough as it was trashy. In fact, some of us used to call it the toilet. We're going to the toilet tonight.
It was just like this storefront, little corner in the dark street kind of joint. And when I got out of the car, I saw a lot of women standing outside, so I'm thinking, oh, I guess it really is ladies' night out. And I had no idea it was a lesbian bar until I got inside and noticed that there were no other people in there but women. The club. And that was on the corner of Laurel and Kettner. It's gone through several changes. It became the Bulk now, and after that, a friend of mine bought it and became partners, and I helped manage that one. Now, the Casbah from up the street moved into it, so it's predominantly heterosexual. So that little site, that little corner's gone through some changes.
That's one thing that hasn't changed. The planes always came over the club and sort of rattled us while we were in there talking, but there was a place called Lily's, and it was owned by Sarah Thompson, and I can't recall the other woman's name, two women who were partners together. I think Sarah's still in town somewhere. It didn't last very long, less than a year, I think, but it was at a time when there was a lot of camaraderie for women to support a women's business. I think it was the first place that was owned by somebody in the community and tried to be more like a community space. It was definitely an all-women's bar. And I think maybe it was this place called. This might have been it. It's hard to tell.
Fabulous new place, everybody was on their lips, called the Flame. And the Flame came out from some flame. And it's been there for 4 years. It became one of the local hot spots. It's now internationally known, good, bad, or indifferent. It's one of the #1 bars here in San Diego.
think it's like maybe the 12th year, 14th year, somewhere around in that. It's just become very old hat. But it was like, the opening was huge. People actually came in limos. I mean, it was something that people looked forward to and talked about. And even when we went to, when you go to another place and you'd say you were from San Diego, they'd go, oh, the Flame is there. That's a great bar.
And then it became, during the Second World War, it was a big hot spot. It was a lot of military guys. Navy Hospital was down the street. And it was, I've talked to a lot of old guys who will come in here that remember this bar from, those days, and people have had wedding receptions here. And it was a state joint, a big bourbon place. It was a guy place.
It was built by a guy who always wanted to have a jazz bar. And he opened it up as a jazz bar in 1962. A year later decided he didn't want to run a bar and leased the bar out to Neuer Aachener, who owns a lot of men's bars in town. And he made it a men's bar. It was called The Swing. When he sold it, it was called The Different Drum. When they sold it, it was Libido's. It was a men's bar from 1963 until I bought it in 1989.
It's the place to go on Friday if you're a gay woman. And you want to be with other gay people. You want to be with other Latino lesbians, other lesbians in general. That's where you go.
The Flame and Bombay are basically the only two lesbian clubs in San Diego.
But I laugh at it now. I mean, it kind of made us all pissed off and made us feel like we kind of weren't able to direct our own lives as much as we wanted to. And that men had so much of everything. And they felt like, well, they worked like dogs to get everything. Why shouldn't they have everything? And they never thought that it would be a good idea to share it with us because, like, what was the benefit? Fred opens this bar, and the women go in, and we're happy for 2 months, and then we say, let's change it. Let's make it more womanly, and we don't like those paintings, and the bathroom doesn't have enough stalls, and it's this and it's that. Here we were, but of course, what else were we to do? It's sort of like when lesbians used to go out to some little place for coffee and desserts and things after some big event. There would be like 10 of us, and we'd all come in at once. And we'd look around and say, oh, all the tables need to move together. So we'd be moving tables together, putting chairs around, and all the waiters would be saying, who are these women? They just come in and take over the space and make it their own and everything. And of course, that was one of our favorite things to say, well, we can go somewhere and make our space in somebody else's space, public space, and make it our space and all that. It was all about space. It was cool.
Making a movie.
About what?
About the history of lesbian bars in San Diego. Yeah, not a movie, but a true project.
Documentary.
Yeah.
Documentary.
Benny, can I have a Coke, please? And yeah.
That's good though. That's a good thing to talk about. They need that. They need more of that. You don't really hear about that. It was probably like the Christians in the catacombs, It was like everybody out there was against us, and we would go into this little dark place, it was a bar, and find each other. And
Okay, so I just, sorry, I wanted to just sort of give you a sense of what happens when the monologue comes up. Diane Germain was really a great, that's the woman who's talking about how it was all about space. It was cool. She was really a great subject to interview. And when I did the installation, actually, with her arms kind of wildly going around in these circles, it was actually going around the walls. I don't know if I can. So, on, off? Thanks. So I just want to show you what's happened a little bit with the Boy Mechanic. Now, from there, I sort of continued this way of showing it. This is from an exhibition that was at Plattform in Berlin, which was kind of great because it had these big windows, so you could like look in at night at these places in San Diego. It's completely strange, kind of convergence of two very different landscapes, Berlin and San Diego. And at this point, I used this as the opportunity to publish the whole set of postcards from San Diego. So that's the end of the San Diego edition. And as Doug mentioned, I'm now moving on to the Los Angeles edition. And this is the exhibition that I did this last spring. And in this case, I've shown 2 large photographs, and then on the wall, I made a map of all of the sites that I'd been able to find so far it's a sort of fantasy map of LA. Obviously, it's not all of LA, and there's a long history that still needs to be uncovered, but this was, at this preliminary stage, this was my approach. This is a bar that's called the Oxwood Inn, and the Oxwood Inn has been in existence for 30 years, and it's in the valley, it's in Van Nuys, so that's a very unusual thing to find, actually. And this is some of the details. This is, I can read the text for you. This says, Moonshadow, guys at Fuel told me about a woman's bar on Burbank. They said go past Rawhide and then Jocks on the left and see Bullet on the right, and it would be immediately on the left. And when I walked up to the door, it was all men standing around. They said that it was absolutely a women's bar. They were there for the pool league. Inside, we met the owners. Christy thought the bartender was cute. So there's just these little narratives about the places and what I found out about them and what my experience of them was. And then opposite that wall was the video that I made for that went along with this installation. And I'll just show you a brief clip of it. It's not a narrative piece or narrative documentary in the same way that this last one was. And do I need to push the button again, the power button?
Yeah, that same one.
The one below? Oh, great. So the Los Angeles edition of The Boy Mechanic will take a while. I mean, it's such a different city to work in, and what I've discovered is that that's what's going to happen with each town that I go to. It'll be a different kind of installation or exhibition that comes out of it. And there's so much driving in Los Angeles that to sort of find them and photograph them at certain times of the day is really a much longer project. So there's a lot of sort of driving by and finding the locations. And so I produced this kind of slow-mo, kind of drunken video that identified the bars and sort of slowed the video down so that you could see them as you went by. And there's a soundtrack. It's, for some reason, it's not playing, it seems like, but it's kind of the sound of traffic and horns. And I was shooting this out of moonroof of an SUV, so there were a lot of other drivers that were pissed off at us for driving so slow and think you get the idea. It goes through the rest of the bars. So any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering with the anatomy